Islam, major world religion promulgated by the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia in the 7th century CE. The Arabic term Islam, literally surrender, illuminates the fundamental religious idea of Islam, that the believer called a Muslim, from the active particle of Islam, accepts surrender to the will of Allah, in Arabic, Allah, God. Allah is viewed as the sole God, creator, sustainer, and restorer of the world. The will of Allah, to which human beings must submit, is made known through the sacred scriptures, the Quran, often spelled Quran in English, which Allah revealed to his messenger, Muhammad. In Islam, Muhammad is considered the last of a series of prophets, including Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Solomon, and Jesus, and his message simultaneously consummates and completes the revelations attributed to earlier prophets. This article deals with the fundamental beliefs and practices of Islam and with the connection of religion and society in the Islamic world. The history of the various peoples who embraced Islam is covered in the article Islamic world. The foundations of Islam. The legacy of Muhammad. From the very beginning of Islam, Muhammad had inculcated a sense of brotherhood and a bond of faith among his followers, both of which helped to develop among them a feeling of close relationship that was accentuated by their experiences of persecution as a nascent community in Mecca. The strong attachment to the tenets of the Quranic revelation and the conspicuous socio-economic content of Islamic religious practices cemented this bond of faith. In 622 CE, when the Prophet migrated to Medina, his preaching was soon accepted, and the community state of Islam emerged. During this early period, Islam acquired its characteristic ethos as a religion uniting in itself both the spiritual and temporal aspects of life and seeking to regulate not only the individual's relationship to God through conscience, but human relationships in a social setting as well. Thus, there is not only an Islamic religious institution but also an Islamic law, state, and other institutions governing society. Not until the 20th century were the religious private, and the secular public. This dual religious and social character of Islam, expressing itself in one way as a religious community commissioned by God to bring its own value system to the world through the jihad exertion, commonly translated as holy war or holy struggle, explains the astonishing success of the early generations of Muslims. Within a century after the Prophet's death in 632 CE, they had brought a large part of the globe, from Spain across Central Asia to India, under a new Arab Muslim empire. The period of Islamic conquests and empire building marks the first phase of the expansion of Islam as a religion. Islam's essential egalitarianism within the community of the faithful and its official discrimination against the followers of other religions won rapid converts. Jews and Christians were assigned a special status as communities possessing scriptures and were called the people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab, and, therefore, were allowed religious autonomy. They were, however, required to pay a per capita tax called jizya, as opposed to pagans, who were required to either accept Islam or die. The same status of the people of the book was later extended in particular times and places to Zoroastrians and Hindus, but many people of the book joined Islam in order to escape the disability of the jizya. A much more massive expansion of Islam after the 12th century was inaugurated by the Sufis, Muslim mystics, who were mainly responsible for the spread of Islam. Beside the jihad and Sufi missionary activity, another factor in the spread of Islam was the far-ranging influence of the vast variety of races and cultures embraced by Islam. An estimated total of more than 1.5 billion persons worldwide in the early 21st century has produced important internal differences. All segments of Muslim society, however, are bound by a common faith and a sense of belonging to a single community. With the loss of political power during the period of Western colonialism in the 19th and 20th centuries, the concept of the Islamic community ummah, instead of weakening, became stronger. The faith of Islam helped various Muslim peoples in their struggle to gain political freedom in the mid-20th century, and the unity of Islam contributed to later political solidarity. Islamic doctrine, law, and thinking in general are based upon four sources, or fundamental principles: usul, 1. The Quran, 2. The Sunnah traditions, 3. Ijma consensus, and 4. Ijtihad individual thought. Quran. The Quran, literally, reading, or recitation, is regarded as the verbatim word, or speech, of God delivered to Muhammad by the Archangel Gabriel. Divided into 114 surahs, chapters, of unequal length, it is the fundamental source of Islamic teaching. The surahs revealed at Mecca during the earliest part of Muhammad's career are concerned mostly with ethical and spiritual teachings and the Day of Judgment. The surahs revealed at Medina at a later period in the career of the Prophet are concerned for the most part with social legislation and the politico-moral principles for constituting and ordering the community. Sunnah, a well-trodden path, was used by pre-Islamic Arabs to denote their tribal or common law. In Islam it came to mean the example of the Prophet, i.e., his words and deeds as recorded in compilations known as hadith, in Arabic, hadith, literally, report. A collection of sayings attributed to the Prophet. Hadith provide the written documentation of the Prophet's words and deeds. 6 of these collections, compiled in the 3rd century R. 9th century CE, came to be regarded as especially authoritative by the largest group in Islam, the Sunnis. Another large group, the Shia, has its own hadith contained in 4 canonical collections. The doctrine of Amma, or consensus, was introduced in the 2nd century R. 8th century CE, in order to standardize legal theory and practice and to overcome individual and regional differences of opinion. Though conceived as a consensus of scholars, Amma was in actual practice a more fundamental operative factor. From the 3rd century our Amma has amounted to a principle of stability in thinking. Points on which consensus was reached in practice were considered closed and further substantial questioning of them prohibited. Accepted interpretations of the Quran and the actual content of the Sunnah, i.e., Hadith and theology, all rest finally on the Amma in the sense of the acceptance of the authority of their community. Ijtihad, meaning to endeavor, or to exert effort, was required to find the legal or doctrinal solution to a new problem. In the early period of Islam, because ijtihad took the form of individual opinion, there was a wealth of conflicting and chaotic opinions. In the 2nd century our ijtihad was replaced by qiyas, reasoning by strict analogy, a formal procedure of deduction based on the texts of the Quran and the Hadith. The transformation of Amma into a conservative mechanism and the acceptance of a definitive body of Hadith virtually closed the gate of ijtihad in Sunni Islam while ijtihad continued in Shi'ism. Nevertheless, certain outstanding Muslim thinkers, e.g., al-Ghazali in the 11th–12th century, continued to claim the right of new ijtihad for themselves, and reformers in the 18th–20th centuries, because of modern influences, caused this principle once more to receive wider acceptance. Doctrines of the Quran. The doctrine about God in the Quran is rigorously monotheistic. God is one and unique. He has no partner and no equal. Trinitarianism, the Christian belief that God is three persons in one substance, is vigorously repudiated. Muslims believe that there are no intermediaries between God and the creation that He brought into being by His sheer command, b. Although His presence is believed to be everywhere, He is not incarnated in anything. He is the sole creator and sustainer of the universe, wherein every creature bears witness to His unity and lordship. But He is also just and merciful. His justice ensures order in His creation, in which nothing is believed to be out of place, and His mercy is unbounded and encompasses everything. His creating and ordering the universe is viewed as the act of prime mercy for which all things sing His glories. The God of the Quran, described as majestic and sovereign, is also a personal God. He is viewed as being nearer to one than one's own jugular vein, and, whenever a person in need or distress calls Him, He responds. Above all, He is the God of guidance and shows everything, particularly humanity, the right way, the straight path. This picture of God, wherein the attributes of power, justice, and mercy interpenetrate, is related to the concept of God shared by Judaism and Christianity, and also differs radically from the concepts of pagan Arabia, to which it provided an effective answer. The pagan Arabs believed in a blind and inexorable fate over which humans had no control. For this powerful but insensible fate, the Qur'an substituted a powerful but provident and merciful God. The Qur'an carried through its uncompromising monotheism by rejecting all forms of idolatry and eliminating all gods and divinities that the Arabs worshipped in their sanctuaries, harems, the most prominent of which was the Kaaba sanctuary in Mecca itself. The universe. In order to prove the unity of God, the Qur'an lays frequent stress on the design and order in the universe. There are no gaps or dislocations in nature. Order is explained by the fact that every created thing is endowed with a definite and defined nature whereby it falls into a pattern. This nature, though it allows every created thing to function in a whole, sets limits, and this idea of the limitedness of everything is one of the most fixed points in both the cosmology and theology of the Qur'an. The universe is viewed, therefore, as autonomous, in the sense that everything has its own inherent laws of behavior, but not as autocratic, because the patterns of behavior have been endowed by God and are strictly limited. Everything has been created by us according to a measure, though every creature is thus limited and measured out, and hence depends upon God alone, who reigns unchallenged in the heavens and the earth, is unlimited, independent, and self-sufficient. Humanity. According to the Qur'an, God created two apparently parallel species of creatures, human beings and jinn, the one from clay and the other from fire. About the jinn, however, the Qur'an says little, although it is implied that the jinn are endowed with reason and responsibility but are more prone to evil than human beings are. It is with humanity that the Qur'an, which describes itself as a guide for the human race, is centrally concerned. The story of the fall of Adam, the first man, promoted in Judaism and Christianity, is accepted, but the Qur'an states that God forgave Adam his act of disobedience, which is not viewed in the Qur'an as original sin in the Christian sense of the term. In the story of the creation of humanity, Iblis, or Satan, who protested to God against the creation of human beings, because they would sow mischief on earth, lost in the competition of knowledge against Adam. The Qur'an, therefore, declares humanity to be the noblest of all creation, the created being who bore the trust of responsibility that the rest of creation refused to accept. The Qur'an thus reiterates that all nature has been made subservient to humans, who are seen as God's vice-regent on earth. Nothing in all creation has been made without a purpose, and humanity itself has not been created in sport, but rather has been created with the purpose of serving and obeying God's will. Despite this lofty station, however, the Qur'an describes human nature as frail and faltering. Whereas everything in the universe has a limited nature and every creature recognizes its limitation and insufficiency, human beings are viewed as having been given freedom and therefore are prone to rebelliousness and pride, with the tendency to arrogate to themselves the attributes of self-sufficiency. Pride, thus, is viewed as the cardinal sin of human beings, because, by not recognizing in themselves their essential creaturely limitations, they become guilty of ascribing to themselves partnership with God, shirk, associating a creature with the Creator, and of violating the unity of God. True faith, Iman, thus, consists of belief in the immaculate divine unity, and Islam, surrender, in one's submission to the divine will. Satan, sin, and repentance. In order to communicate the truth of divine unity, God has sent messengers or prophets to human beings, whose weakness of nature makes them ever prone to forget or even willfully to reject divine unity under the promptings of Satan. According to the Quranic teaching, the being who became Satan, Shaitan or Iblis, had previously occupied a high station but fell from divine grace by his act of disobedience in refusing to honor Adam when he was ordered to do so. Since then his work has been to beguile human beings into error and sin. Satan is, therefore, the contemporary of humanity, and Satan's own act of disobedience is construed by the Quran as the sin of pride. Satan's machinations will cease only on the last day. Judging from the accounts of the Quran, the record of humanity's acceptance of the Prophet's messages has been far from perfect. The whole universe is replete with signs of God. The human soul itself is viewed as a witness of the unity and grace of God. The messengers of God have, throughout history, been calling humanity back to God. Yet not all people have accepted the truth. Many of them have rejected it and become disbelievers, kafir, plural kafir. Literally, concealing, i.e., the blessings of God, and, when a person becomes so obdurate, his heart is sealed by God. Nevertheless, it is always possible for a sinner to repent, tawbah, and redeem himself by a genuine conversion to the truth. There is no point of no return, and God is forever merciful and always willing and ready to pardon. Genuine repentance has the effect of removing all sins and restoring a person to the state of sinlessness with which he started his life. Prophecy prophets are men specially elected by God to be his messengers. Prophethood is indivisible, and the Quran requires recognition of all prophets as such without discrimination. Yet they are not all equal, some of them being particularly outstanding in qualities of steadfastness and patience under trial. Abraham, Noah, Moses, and Jesus were such great prophets. As vindication of the truth of their mission, God often vests them with miracles. Abraham was saved from fire, Noah from the deluge, and Moses from the Pharaoh. The conviction that God's messengers are ultimately vindicated and saved is an integral part of the Quranic doctrine. All prophets are human and never part of divinity. They are the most perfect of humans who are recipients of revelation from God. When God wishes to speak to a human, He sends an angel messenger to him or makes him hear a voice or inspires him. Muhammad is accepted as the last prophet in this series and its greatest member, for in him all the messages of earlier prophets were consummated. The archangel Gabriel brought the Qur'ān down to the prophet's heart. Gabriel is represented by the Qur'ān as a spirit whom the prophet could sometimes see and hear. According to early traditions, the prophet's revelations occurred in a state of trance when his normal consciousness was transformed. This state was accompanied by heavy sweating. The Qur'an itself makes it clear that the revelations brought with them a sense of extraordinary weight. If we were to send this Qur'an down on a mountain, you would see it split asunder out of fear of God. This phenomenon at the same time was accompanied by an unshakable conviction that the message was from God, and the Qur'an describes itself as the transcript of a heavenly, mother book, written on a preserved tablet. The conviction was of such an intensity that the Qur'an categorically denies that it is from any earthly source, for in that case it would be liable to manifold doubts and oscillations. Eschatology, doctrine of last things, in Islamic doctrine, on the last day, when the world will come to an end, the dead will be resurrected and a judgment will be pronounced on every person in accordance with his deeds. Although the Qur'an in the main speaks of a personal judgment, there are several verses that speak of the resurrection of distinct communities that will be judged according to their own book. In conformity with this, the Qur'an also speaks in several passages of the death of communities, each one of which has a definite term of life. The actual evaluation, however, will be for every individual, whatever the terms of reference of his performance. In order to prove that the resurrection will occur, the Qur'an uses a moral and a physical argument. Because not all requital is meted out in this life, a final judgment is necessary to bring it to completion. Physically, God, who is all-powerful, has the ability to destroy and bring back to life all creatures, who are limited and are, therefore, subject to God's limitless power. Some Islamic schools deny the possibility of human intercession but most accept it, and in any case God Himself, in His mercy, may forgive certain sinners. Those condemned will burn in hellfire, and those who are saved will enjoy the abiding joys of paradise. Hell and heaven are both spiritual and corporeal. Besides suffering in physical fire, the damned will also experience fire in their hearts. Similarly, the blessed will experience, besides corporeal enjoyment, the greatest happiness of divine pleasure. Social service, because the purpose of human existence is submission to the divine will, as is the purpose of every other creature. God's role in relation to human beings is that of the commander. Whereas the rest of nature obeys God automatically, humans are the only creatures that possess the choice to obey or disobey. With the deep-seated belief in Saturn's existence, humanity's fundamental role becomes one of moral struggle, which constitutes the essence of human endeavor. Recognition of the unity of God does not simply rest in the intellect but entails consequences in terms of the moral struggle, which consists primarily in freeing oneself of narrowness of mind and smallness of heart. One must go out of oneself and expend one's possessions for the sake of others. The doctrine of social service, in terms of alleviating suffering and helping the needy, constitutes an integral part of Islamic teaching. Praying to God and other religious acts are deemed to be incomplete in the absence of active service to the needy. In regard to this matter, the Quranic criticisms of human nature become very sharp. Man is by nature timid. When evil befalls him, he panics, but when good things come to him he prevents them from reaching others. It is Satan who whispers into a person's ears that by spending for others he will become poor. God, on the contrary, promises prosperity in exchange for such expenditure, which constitutes a credit with God and grows much more than the money people invest in usury. Hoarding of wealth without recognizing the rights of the poor is threatened with the direst punishment in the hereafter and is declared to be one of the main causes of the decay of societies in this world. The practice of usury is forbidden. With this socio-economic doctrine cementing the bond of faith, there emerges the idea of a closely knit community of the faithful who are declared to be brothers unto each other. Muslims are described as the middle community bearing witness on humankind, the best community produced for humankind, whose function it is to enjoin good and forbid evil. Quran. Cooperation and good advice within the community are emphasized, and a person who deliberately tries to harm the interests of the community is to be given exemplary punishment. Opponents from within the community are to be fought and reduced with armed force, if issues cannot be settled by persuasion and arbitration. Because the mission of the community is to enjoin good and forbid evil, so that there is no mischief and corruption on earth, the doctrine of jihad is the logical outcome. For the early community it was a basic religious concept. The lesser jihad, or holy striving, means an active struggle using armed force whenever necessary. The object of such striving is not the conversion of individuals to Islam but rather the gaining of political control over the collective affairs of societies to run them in accordance with the principles of Islam. Individual conversions occur as a byproduct of this process when the power structure passes into the hands of the Muslim community. In fact, according to strict Muslim doctrine, conversions by force are forbidden, because after the revelation of the Quran, good and evil have become distinct, so that one may follow whichever one may prefer. Quran, and it is also strictly prohibited to wage wars for the sake of acquiring worldly glory, power, and rule. With the establishment of the Muslim Empire, however, the doctrine of the lesser jihad was modified by the leaders of the community. Their main concern had become the consolidation of the empire and its administration, and thus they interpreted the teaching in a defensive rather than in an expansive sense. The Kharijite sect, which held that decision belongs to God alone, insisted on continuous and relentless jihad, but its followers were virtually destroyed during the internecine wars in the 8th century. Beside a measure of economic justice and the creation of a strong idea of community, the Prophet Muhammad effected a general reform of Arab society, in particular protecting its weaker segments, the poor, the orphans, the women, and the slaves. Slavery was not legally abolished, but emancipation of slaves was religiously encouraged as an act of merit. Slaves were given legal rights, including the right of acquiring their freedom in return for payment, in installments, of a sum agreed upon by the slave and his master out of his earnings. A slave woman who bore a child by her master became automatically free after her master's death. The infanticide of girls that was practiced among certain tribes in pre-Islamic Arabia, out of fear of poverty or a sense of shame, was forbidden. Distinction and privileges based on tribal rank or race were repudiated in the Quran and in the celebrated farewell pilgrimage address of the Prophet shortly before his death. All are therein declared to be equal children of Adam, and the only distinction recognized in the sight of God is to be based on piety and good acts. The age-old Arab institution of intertribal revenge called thar, whereby it was not necessarily the killer who was executed but a person equal in rank to the slain person, was abolished. The pre-Islamic ethical ideal of manliness was modified and replaced by a more humane ideal of moral virtue and piety. Fundamental practices and institutions of Islam. The 5 pillars. During the earliest decades after the death of the Prophet, certain basic features of the religio-social organization of Islam were singled out to serve as anchoring points of the community's life and formulated as the pillars of Islam. To these 5, the Kharijite sect added a 6th pillar, the jihad, which, however, was not accepted by the general community. The Shahada, or profession of faith. The first pillar is the profession of faith. There is no deity but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, upon which depends membership in the community. The profession of faith must be recited at least once in one's lifetime, aloud, correctly, and purposively, with an understanding of its meaning and with an assent from the heart. From this fundamental belief are derived beliefs in 1. Angels, particularly Gabriel, the angel of inspiration; 2. The revealed book, the Quran and the sacred books of Judaism and Christianity; 3. A series of prophets, among whom figures of Jewish and Christian tradition are particularly eminent; although it is believed that God has sent messengers to every nation, and 4. The last day, Day of Judgment. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.